What happens when the bond between two lovers turns into a deadly alliance? How far can a couple go when they're united by desire and by blood? These are the most infamous couples sentenced to death together. Welcome to Criminal Records. Alvin and Judith Neelley. Alvin and Judith Neelley were a couple who gained national notoriety in the early 1980s for a string of disturbing crimes across Georgia and Alabama. Judith was born in 1964 in Tennessee. She met Alvin when she was just a teenager. He was 25 years older, already married, and deeply involved in criminal activity. Their connection was instant and dangerous. They ran away together, living out of a car and staying in cheap motels. By the time Judith was 16, she was pregnant with twins. Alvin left his wife and married Judith. Together, they dove headfirst into a chaotic, lawless life. Their relationship was toxic from the start. They survived through theft and were repeatedly arrested. Judith gave birth to 3 children while in and out of jail. But in 1982, things took a much darker turn. Before their most infamous crimes, the Neelleys had already been involved in violent incidents. On September 11, 1982, they shot Ken Dooley, an employee at a youth detention center. The very next day, they firebombed the home of another staff member, Linda Adair, using a Molotov cocktail. Both attacks were preceded by phone calls from a woman claiming she had been abused at the center, but no one could identify the caller. On September 25, 1982, the Neelleys abducted Lisa Ann Millison, a 13-year-old girl from a shopping mall in Rome, Georgia. They took her to a motel in Scottsboro, Alabama, where she was held captive and brutally abused. When their attempts to poison her with drain cleaner failed, Judith shot her in the back and dumped her body in Little River Canyon. Just weeks later, in October, they abducted another couple, Janice Chapman and John Hancock. They shot Hancock, who miraculously survived, and took Chapman to their motel room, where she was tortured and ultimately killed. Hancock's testimony was crucial in identifying the Neelleys as the perpetrators. The couple was captured on October 9, 1982, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, after a 3-week manhunt. Judith was charged with Lisa's murder, among other crimes. During her trial, she claimed Alvin had manipulated and abused her into committing these horrific acts. Despite this defense, psychiatric evaluations confirmed she was fully capable of understanding her actions. Although the jury recommended life imprisonment, Judge Randall Cole sentenced her to death by electric chair in 1983. Her sentence was later commuted to life in prison in 1999 by Governor Fob James, following the jury's original recommendation. In 2018, Judith Neelley was denied parole and remains incarcerated. Alvin Neelley died in prison in 2005 at the age of 56. The next case is undoubtedly one of the most disturbing stories in California's criminal history. The twisted partnership of Cynthia Coffman and James Gregory Marlow during a series of brutal crimes in 1986. Cynthia Coffman was born in 1962 in St. Louis, Missouri. Her life was marked by instability from an early age. Her father left the family, leaving her mother to raise her alone. By the age of 18, Cynthia was already married and had a child, but that marriage quickly fell apart, and she was left searching for love, security, or perhaps just a way out. She believed she found it in Arizona, where she met James Marlow, a recently released ex-convict. Marlow, originally from Kentucky, had a lengthy criminal record and had served time at Folsom State Prison, where he earned the nickname the Folsom Wolf. In July 1986, the two got married in Tennessee, and as a wedding gift, Cynthia received a tattoo that read, "Property of the Folsom Wolf." Together, they set out west. By October, they had reached California, and by November, the nightmare began. On November 7, 1986, they kidnapped Karina Novus, a 20-year-old woman from an ATM in Redlands, California. Just 5 days later, they abducted Lennell Murray, 19, while she was working in Huntington Beach. Their pattern was chilling. They targeted women who had just withdrawn cash from ATMs, forced them into a vehicle, and then subjected them to horrific abuse. Afterward, they used the victims' credit cards for personal purchases. A breakthrough came on November 14th. when authorities discovered Karina's checkbook and documents bearing the names of Marlow and Coffman in a dumpster. This discovery led investigators to a lodge in Big Bear City, where the couple had recently stayed. A search near Big Bear Lake ended in their arrest. At the time, they were found with stolen clothing from Murray's dry cleaning job, and Coffman had items belonging to both victims. During the trial, prosecutors presented strong evidence of Coffman's active involvement. She, however, claimed to be a victim of Marlow's control, stating that he subjected her to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and even threatened her family. On August 30th, 1989, both were sentenced to death for the murder of Karina Novus. With that ruling, Cynthia Coffman became the first woman in California to receive the death penalty since its reinstatement in 1977. Our next case is deeply unsettling, yet impossible to ignore. The chilling story of Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck, later dubbed the Lonely Hearts Killers, whose series of scams would soon take a dark and twisted turn. In the late 1940s, this troubled couple came into the public eye, using personal ads in newspapers to find vulnerable victims they could exploit. Raymond Fernandez was born on December 17, 1914, in Hawaii to Spanish parents. His family later moved to Bridgeport, Connecticut. As a young man, he moved to Spain, married, had 4 children, and then abandoned them without a second thought. He enlisted in the Spanish Merchant Navy and later worked for British intelligence during World War II. After the war, a head injury changed him. Some believed it damaged the part of his brain responsible for impulse control. While in prison for theft, a cellmate introduced him to voodoo. Raymond left prison convinced he possessed a supernatural charm, especially over women. Martha Seabrook was born on May 6, 1920, in Milton, Florida. A glandular problem caused her to gain weight prematurely, making her a target for bullying. Her home life was even worse, claiming that her brother abused her and her mother would beat her. Despite these hardships, she became a nurse, moved to California, and had 2 children. Desperate for love, she invented tragic stories about her parents to gain sympathy. Obsessed with romantic novels, she longed for a fairy tale ending. In 1947, Martha placed a Lonely Hearts ad, which Raymond responded to. Their letters became intensely passionate very quickly. Martha left her children and moved to New York. At first, she pretended to be her sister, but soon she became involved in Raymond's scams. She helped him seduce, con, and ultimately murder women he met through personal ads. Why did she do it? Perhaps love, perhaps madness, perhaps both. But once they united, their scams turned deadly, and there was no turning back. Their actions grew increasingly sinister. In 1949, they targeted Delene Downing, a young widow from Michigan. When Delene started questioning Raymond's behavior, Martha, overcome by jealousy and the fear of being exposed, took her life. Then, to tie up any loose ends, she murdered Delene's 2-year-old daughter. At that point, their actions escalated to a terrifying level. Their final victim was Janet Faye, a 66-year-old woman from New York. She had been lured with promises of marriage, but when Martha saw Janet and Raymond growing close, she lost control and struck Janet with a hammer. This act killed Janet and became the incident that led to their capture. Authorities arrested Raymond and Martha in Michigan shortly after. Raymond admitted to their crimes, but both denied involvement in other cases they were suspected of. They were sent to New York to face charges only for the murder of Janet Faye. The court was stunned by the bizarre and intense relationship between the two and the details of their actions. Why were they convicted based on just one case? Raymond's own words, along with undeniable evidence, were enough to deliver the verdict. Both were found guilty and sentenced to death. On March 8, 1951, at Sing Sing Prison, their sentence was carried out. Raymond's final words demonstrated how deeply he felt connected to Martha. "I want to express this with conviction. I love Martha." What does the public know about love? Martha's final words also revolved around love. "My story is one of love, but only those who have suffered for love can understand what I mean. I don't hate anyone today. Some parents correct, others control." But the next case was utterly incomprehensible. Samantha and John Allen, both born in 1988, lived in Phoenix, Arizona. Samantha was the cousin of Amy Deal, a 10-year-old girl whom Samantha and her husband John were taking care of at home. Tragically, the Allens, along with other family members, subjected Amy to constant and severe abuse. This included forcing her to eat dog feces, crush aluminum cans barefoot, consume hot sauce, and endure frequent physical assaults. They often locked her in a small plastic box as punishment. The box, measuring less than 90 centimeters in length, less than 30 centimeters in width, and 30 centimeters in depth, was a cramped and suffocating environment for her. On July 11, 2011, Amy was punished for allegedly taking ice cream from the freezer. As a punishment, the Allens locked her in the small plastic box and left her locked up overnight in an uncooled garage. The following morning, they discovered that Amy had tragically died from asphyxiation during the night. This case shocked the public, not only due to its severity but also because it involved several family members. During the trial, the defense argued that Amy's death was accidental and not deliberate. John Allen expressed regret, admitting that the events leading to Amy's death were an accident and acknowledging his responsibility in the incident. In August 2017, Samantha Allen was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Just a few months later, in November, her husband, John Allen, was also convicted of first-degree murder, along with other serious charges related to the abuse of the young victim. He too received the death penalty. Together, they became the first married couple in Arizona's history to receive such a harsh sentence. Both Samantha and John Allen appealed their convictions and sentences. In 2020, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld Samantha Allen's conviction and sentence, rejecting her claims that the prosecution had unfairly implied that she was solely responsible for Amy's death. Similarly, in 2018, the Arizona Supreme Court confirmed John Allen's conviction and sentence. During the sentencing hearing, John Allen expressed his remorse, stating, "I want to say, I'm sorry. What happened was an accident. I'm an idiot. I'm a fool. It was an accident." The specific details of Samantha Allen's last words were not made public. Were other family members held accountable for their involvement in Amy's abuse? Yes, several other relatives were convicted for their participation in the mistreatment of Amy. Cynthia Stoltzman, Amy's aunt and legal guardian, was sentenced to 24 years in prison after pleading guilty. Amy's grandmother, Judith Deal, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In addition, Amy's father, David Deal, was also sentenced to 14 years in prison after pleading guilty. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld Samantha Allen's conviction and sentence in 2020. Both are currently awaiting the fulfillment of their sentences. But how does desperation manifest when you're no longer young, yet remain dangerous? In the late 1980s, Faye and Ray Copeland, a modest, elderly couple from Mooresville, Missouri, would make history as the oldest couple ever sentenced to death in the United States. Their story revolves around greed, manipulation, and betrayal. Ray Copeland, born in 1914 in Oklahoma, spent most of his life on the fringes of the law. Cattle rustling, forging checks, fraud, he was a scam artist through and through. In 1940, he married Faye Wilson, born in 1921 in Harrison, Arkansas. The couple had 6 children and faced constant financial struggles, moving frequently due to Ray's illegal activities, which also led to multiple prison sentences. Because of his criminal record, Ray couldn't buy cattle legally, so he devised a plan to take advantage of migrant workers passing through the area. He hired drifters, made them write bad checks to buy cattle on his behalf, then sold the cattle, leaving the workers stranded without payment. Ray and Faye targeted the drifters looking for work. Once hired, Ray involved them in his fraudulent cattle business. The workers were then killed, and their bodies were disposed of, usually buried on their farm. Investigators found a record with the names of the workers, and next to 12 of them, including 5 victims, was a crude X written by Faye, suggesting a systematic pattern of eliminating people. The main motive behind these acts appeared to be profit. By disposing of the workers, Ray ensured there were no witnesses to his fraudulent activities, allowing him to continue his schemes without interruptions. This operation went on for years until, In 1989, a former employee tipped off the authorities about suspicious activities at the Copeland farm. There is still debate over whether Faye participated directly or was merely an accomplice. She claimed to be a victim of Ray's behavior, but evidence suggests she had a more active role than she admitted. In October 1989, authorities executed a search warrant at the Copeland farm. There, they found human remains and a Marlin .22 caliber rifle, matching the weapons used in the killings. They also discovered a quilt made from victim clothing, underscoring the disturbing nature of the situation. Faye's defense argued she was a woman abused under Ray's control, but the jury found her guilty, leading to 4 life sentences and a long-term prison sentence. Ray Copeland was also found guilty and sentenced to death. Upon hearing Faye's sentence, Ray said, "Well, some people have those things happen to them." The couple became the oldest in the U.S. to face such consequences. Ray died of natural causes on October 19, 1993, at the age of 78, still awaiting his execution. Faye's sentence was reduced to life imprisonment in 1999 after appeals revealed her history of abuse. She was released in 2002 due to deteriorating health and died in a nursing home on December 23, 2003, at the age of 82. Lisa Jo Chamberlain was born in 1976, and by March 2004, she was living in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, with her boyfriend, Roger Lee Gillett. They were staying at the house of Roger's cousin, Vernon Hewlett, and his girlfriend, Linda Heinzelman. Lisa and Roger had criminal records, mainly for substance abuse and theft. However, what happened in that house overshadowed everything they had done before. Tensions were rising, money was tight, and rumors said Roger was furious because he had been told to move out. In a moment of crisis, according to Chamberlain, what began as a robbery in search of a supposed safe turned violent when Vernon and Linda couldn't or wouldn't open it. What followed was horrifying. Linda Heinzelman was attacked and then asphyxiated with a plastic bag, suffering for hours. Afterward, Chamberlain and Gillett transported the victims' bodies in Heinzelman's truck to a remote farm near Russell, Kansas, owned by Gillett's grandfather, where they hid the bodies in a freezer. It was during an investigation into illegal substances that authorities found the human remains. Both were taken back to Mississippi to stand trial for first-degree murder, which carried a potential sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Chamberlain's defense argued that her troubled past, including PTSD and borderline personality disorder, influenced her actions. They also suggested that her history of abuse contributed to her involvement. Chamberlain and Gillett were convicted, initially sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2018, Gillett's sentence was changed to life without the possibility of parole. By 2025, currently incarcerated at the Central Mississippi Correctional Facility. Alton Coleman was born on November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois. Raised mostly by his grandmother due to his mother's multiple jobs, Coleman had a troubled history with the law. Between 1973 and 1983, he faced 6 serious charges, 2 of which were later dismissed. In 1973, he pleaded guilty to armed robbery after kidnapping and assaulting a woman, resulting in a 3-year prison sentence. Deborah Brown, born on November 11, 1962, had no criminal history before meeting Coleman. Described as a dependent individual, possibly due to a childhood head injury, her vulnerability made her more susceptible to Coleman's influence. At 21, Brown broke off her engagement and left her family to join Coleman, who was already facing legal issues for mistreating a young woman. In May 1984, fearing imprisonment, Coleman and Brown began a horrific crime spree across Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. Their victims ranged from children to elderly individuals, many of whom lived in African American communities, making it easier for them to gain trust. Their first known victim was 9-year-old Vernita Wheat from Kenosha, Wisconsin. On May 29, 1984, Coleman took Vernita for a walk in Illinois. Her body was found 3 weeks later in an abandoned building near her grandmother's house, showing signs of abuse and distress. Coleman and Brown escalated their crimes, using deception to gain access to their victims' homes. For instance, in Norwood, Ohio, they pretended to be potential buyers for a trailer to enter the home of Harry and Marlene Walters. Once inside, they attacked the couple, resulting in Marlene's death and Harry's severe injuries. Their widespread actions led the FBI to add Coleman to its 10 most wanted list. On July 12, 1984, a massive manhunt ended with his arrest on July 20, 1984, in Evanston, Illinois. Authorities from various states collaborated to determine the best legal approach, aiming for the harshest penalties. Ohio was chosen as the starting point due to the severity of the crimes committed there. In Ohio, both Coleman and Brown were found responsible for the deaths of Marlene Walters and Tunny Story. During sentencing, Brown showed little remorse, sending a note to the judge that said, "I discouraged her, and I don't give a damn. I had a lot of fun." Subsequent trials in Indiana led to further convictions, with both Coleman and Brown receiving severe sentences. Coleman was also sentenced to an additional 100 years, while Brown received 40 more years for other illegal activities. At that time, Alton Coleman was the only person in the country sentenced to death in 3 states: Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. After years of litigation, Coleman was granted a judicial release on April 26, 2002 at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. Deborah Brown's sentences were gradually commuted. In 1991, her Ohio sentence was reduced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, considering her low IQ and her submissive role in her relationship with Coleman. Her Indiana sentence was also commuted, and she continues to serve life in the Ohio Women's Reformatory. In his final hours, Alton Coleman showed no visible remorse for his actions. He requested an elaborate last meal that included a beef steak, fried chicken, salad, sweet potato pie, French fries, collard greens, onion rings, cornbread, cheese-covered broccoli, cookies with gravy, and a cherry Coke. As he was led to the execution chamber, he recited Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd."